We're very excited to open the MSPCA-Angell Giving Day with an update on our pet relocation program. Please welcome Mike Keiley, our Director of Adoption Centers and Programs, and Michelle Harvanek, Director of Operations at Northeast Animal Shelter, our Salem location. The MSPCA-Angell rescued more than 9,000 homeless animals in 2022, and many of these were through relocation to Massachusetts from areas of the country where adoptive homes are scarce. Mike and Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. You can go to the next slide, Allie. Well, we already covered this part, so we can go on to the next one as well, and we'll do our intros in a moment. But I think today, this is a really big topic we're excited to talk to you all about. We're going to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, but I really want to make sure that we leave enough time at the end for questions, because I'm sure there's a lot of things that people have on their mind or questions they have specific about the program. So we're going to give you the best overview that we can. But as you can see on this agenda, we talk about who we are, about the MSPCA and Northeast merger, relocation by the numbers, about our program, solving the problem at the roots, challenges with relocation, and finally, and most importantly, how you can help. So you can go on to the next slide, Allie. And just to give a little bit more of an introduction, I'm Mike Keiley, Director of Adoption Centers and Programs. I have been with the MSPCA for 29 years in the Animal Protection Division. And one of the things that I think is interesting is relocation is not something that we were actively involved in until our merge with Northeast Animal Shelter. And we started that affiliation in 2021. And it's been one of the most exciting parts of our program. I think we are working and operating in new and different ways. So I'm really excited to talk about that. But I'll hand it over to Michelle to get started, as she is the one that does this every single day.
Hey everyone, my name is Michelle Harvanek. I'm the Director of Operations at Northeast Animal Shelter. I've been with the MSPCA for 1.5 years, and prior to MSPCA, I was at a municipal shelter that was more of a source shelter where we sent animals out. So I came with a unique perspective on relocation. Next slide, Allie. So here's just a map of relocation by the numbers for the past 2 years since our affiliation was announced. As you can see, we're really focused on the Southeast and South Carolina specifically, and Texas. Texas is one of the states that has a huge overpopulation problem, so we are focused there, and South Carolina we're doing a lot with as well. Next slide, Allie. And in 2020, sorry, can go back to that was just 2022 alone. We brought in over 4,000 animals through relocation. So why do we relocate animals to Massachusetts? We feel that animal overpopulation across the country is a shared responsibility. We want to reduce euthanasia for time and space in places where that is a reality. We want to provide humane adoption options for New England residents and create available space at the source for more animals in need. Right now, there's really a national crisis around large dogs specifically. So we are pretty focused on helping that population of animals and doing everything we can to make sure that those animals are able to continue to get to us, where in other locations, relocation for those pets may have slowed down. Next slide. So a little bit about our relocation program and the day-to-day here. We do 4 transports a week, 2 dog transports and 2 cat transports to Northeast. Northeast is our primary relocation center. It is the largest relocation center in New England. The Cape location is our secondary relocation center, and they're taking direct transports to that location as well. And we transfer animals to our other locations to maximize our relocation intake. We follow the best practices outlined by the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement and comply with all Massachusetts Department of Agriculture regulations. And we are able to utilize the veterinary strength of the MSPCA-Angell to better assist. Next slide.
So I think what's important to know just about what we have accomplished at Northeast is really how we model our programming. So we really work and shifted our work to working with larger national organizations, namely the ASPCA, Bissell Pet Foundation, Best Friends Animal Society, and Greater Good Charities. And the reason for that is one of the things that's really important is that we connect into all of the activity that's happening around relocation rather than sort of being off to the side. I think whenever we work with other agencies that are doing this work as well, we can maximize the resources necessary to help the largest number of animals, reduce costs, and really ultimately not duplicate efforts. So we're really excited that we get to work with them all the time. And it does help tremendously to make that an efficient and effective program. As Michelle said, our focus is on South Carolina right now. We have identified that we want to help and be nimble and work around the country where the need is. But we also really wanted to work on an area that we could continually go back to and improve and really use the sort of depth of the strategy for relocation to impact one community more deeply than we could if we're moving around from state to state. And I think one of the things that really worked well for South Carolina and something that's reflected throughout all of our programming is really just that we are building these partnerships with other shelters and rescue groups, really based on trust and an understanding of program alignment. And I think that's crucial. There's been some times that bad experiences in relocation are based on that lack of trust, or that the community is, or the rescue or shelter is moving animals because they don't trust their community to adopt those animals. And I think that is a really big problem that we have to address in animal welfare. What we want to use relocation for is moving animals around to areas for adoption that can't find homes in the area that they're in. We don't want to deny good adopters at those source in favor of moving animals. We want it to be both. We want to maximize the adoption locally, and then for those that can't find a home, bring them to Massachusetts to find homes here. And one of the things that's really important to us, especially as we started this affiliation with Northeast in 2021, was that how we talk about those partnerships is really crucial. What I've observed in animal welfare over my time is sort of an accidental description of relocation that puts the southern shelters that we're working with in a really bad position. And what I mean by that is it's given this perception to the public that that we are saving animals and other shelters are not. And I think that is really problematic. And it does get down to bad terminology like no kill and high kill and all these different terms, and vilifies some of the southern shelters, which really is tough for them to endure while they're trying to help animals. And I think it's important to know that every shelter that we have ever worked with desires to help animals as much as we do, and that they are working as hard as they possibly can. And the key difference really is they are dealing with a much bigger problem than we are with overpopulation. And that's due to things that are outside of people's control, like poverty issues, like access to affordable vet care, rural communities that can't even physically get to spay neuter clinics, or and just the environment alone. In the southern part of the United States, the temperatures year-round are more favorable for breeding year-round, as well as outdoor populations of animals surviving year-round, where we have a different climate that has aided in us not having such a deep overpopulation issue. So whenever we talk about what we're doing with another shelter, we are talking about it from a partnership, and that we are working together to try to help animals that are in need, not working against each other or saving from those other shelters. And I just really highlight that because I think it's an important one, and there is a lot of language out there that unfortunately reinforces the wrong message. The other thing that's really important to us is avoid cherry picking of the most adoptable animals. Like I said, a shelter in its truest form is an integral part of every community, and that it's there to help the animals that are in need, and it's there to help, and the community needs to help in that mission. And so if we take all of the most highly adoptable animals out of that shelter, it denies the opportunity for people in that community to adopt animals that they're looking for. And, honestly, those animals are going to get adopted. The really small, fluffy dogs, the puppies, most of those are going to get adopted if they don't have too many of that particular breed. And what tends to happen is rescues and some relocation programs will take those most adoptable animals out And what's left behind is traditionally what's considered to be more challenging animals to adopt. And like Michelle said, larger breed dogs or certain breeds like pit bulls. And what we do instead is that we say, we want to help you with what you need help with. And so instead of saying, you know, we want this particular animal and this particular animal, we identify what works for us up in Massachusetts, what we think our community wants to adopt from a behavior standpoint, personality standpoint, and we say, here are the size kennels that we have available to offer you. Please choose the animals that you think will do best and that will help you the most. And that's how we operate our program, which I think is really important to the shelters that we work with. And then lastly, we would like to reduce the financial burden on the sending shelter. We know that it's costly. A lot of the municipal shelters that are out there especially have a very limited budget. And what we don't want to do is ask them to do everything for us, spay and neuter the animal, do this medical procedure, you know, take all of the weight, and we'll do the adoption part of it. You know, they're in a desperate situation. So sometimes that can happen where a lot of pressure is put on that shelter to do all those things. But we recognize that, especially at MSPCA-Angell, we have a strength in our veterinary medicine. We encourage shelters to send us unspayed and unneutered animals because we know we can deliver on that in a timely way, in a cost-effective way up here in Massachusetts, and they can't. Or if there is an animal that has a more significant medical issue, we have specialty medicine doctors at our Angell Animal Medical Center that might be able to help that animal in a way that would be less burdensome than it would be to the southern shelter that can't find specialty care easily. So we like to do that to make sure that we're all working together and conserving those resources on the ground to be able to use for programming that's going to solve the overpopulation issue in their community. All right, next slide, please. So here's a really good example of what I mean by the helping with a medical issue. This is Trudy. Trudy is an amazing animal that you're going to learn a little bit in a few minutes about some of the on-the-ground programs that we're doing in South Carolina. And Trudy is a dog that we met through those programs. One of our vets said, hey, there's this dog that has back end issues and can't walk, use the back, her back legs. The shelter has done a fantastic job of getting her a wheelchair and trying to get her to a point where she's in an adoptive home because she's such a special dog. But they saw her on one trip that they went down on, and she was there at the next one, and they said, she's just not getting adopted. And it makes sense when there's so many dogs in that shelter. It's hard to imagine that a dog with a disability like Trudy has is going to be able to outcompete adoptable puppies and other dogs that don't have these issues. So everybody lobbied to get Trudy up to our organization. We brought her up to Massachusetts. We got her some specialty care through our neurology department. And really kind of just continued to work on getting some strength in her back legs. Eventually in our care, she was able to shed the wheelchair and move on her own. And most importantly, she was cherished and adopted. And she, as you can see in this picture, found a wonderful home in a very timely manner in a way that it might not have happened in South Carolina. And it really was such a touching moment and such a really important part for our relationships with South Carolina to see that we would be willing to help a dog like Trudy when she was struggling so much to find a home in their community. Go to the next slide.
So one of the new focus points since we've affiliated has been natural disasters. So we use relocation for relief from these situations. We help with every major natural disaster where help is requested. Since we've affiliated, we've helped 336 animals from natural disasters. And I think what is really unique about our program is we not only relocate animals from these situations, but we also send staff to help on the ground with daily care and whatever else is needed. And I think with natural disaster work, it's important to note that we are taking animals from the local shelters, the current population that's there. So they are able to put animals that are saved from whatever natural disaster happened into their local shelters so that they have a chance to be reunited with their owners. And then, once things are a little bit more stable, we might go back and take some more animals from that population if they weren't all able to be reunited. But most important with natural disaster work is making sure people have a chance to be reunited with their pets. So this is a big focus of ours. Next slide. One of the other ways we're getting involved at a national level is with cruelty cases. These are some of the most challenging events for any shelter to deal with, and we're happy that we're able to support our partners when they come across these. Some of our recent assistance with large cases are the Humane Society of the Delta. This was a humane society in Arkansas that had just deplorable conditions. They were shut down. We were able to pull a couple animals from that case. The Humane Society of the United States Beagle Case in 2022. I'll talk a little bit more about that one in a minute. And then multiple cases in South Carolina. There have been multiple hoarding cases and other cruelty cases that we've helped with there. Next slide. So the Beagle case happened in 2022, and that was going on for several months with the Humane Society of the United States and the beagles that were pulled from a facility that was breeding them for research purposes. We pulled 200 animals from this case over the course of 3 or 4 months, I want to say. We were involved pretty early on in the process. And there were many medical and behavioral challenges, but the whole group of dogs was just absolutely sweet. A lot of the medical challenges we saw were just like sores on their paw pads, dental issues, things like that. We also did end up with a couple of pregnant dogs from this case, so that 200 number includes those that were born in our care. Next slide. So when we were called to help with the Beagle case with HSUS, they had some other pets in their care from other cases they had been involved in. And while we all responded to help with beagles, they asked if we would help with some others that they had from different cases as well. So the white husky dog in this picture, her name was Happy when we got her. She's from a case in New Mexico that was a cruelty case. And she was born in the Humane Society of the United States care. They picked up, I think, 85 huskies from this case, and some of them were pregnant. So when we went down in May, she was about 8 weeks old. She and her siblings were growing up in a shelter, and HSUS recognizes, they would be better growing up in homes. Can we do something to get them out of here? So of course we said yes. And so we took her and her siblings back with us when we took a bunch of beagles too. And Happy just celebrated her 1-year birthday. So she's doing great in her home, and we're very excited we were able to help in this way too. Next slide.
So I want to talk a little bit about solving the problems at the roots. I mean, relocation is an incredible program that has been super important to help animals that are in need right now. But one of the things that we recognize is that relocation alone won't solve the overpopulation issue. It will help animals in the moment, but we really wanted to go deeper into how do we help create a situation in which the overpopulation issue is being addressed. And I think the way I like to describe it is moving relocation from an endpoint program to a starting point program. And I think, as Michelle mentioned in an earlier slide, overpopulation is a shared responsibility for all of animal welfare, even if it's not in our own state, and we're not dealing with that on a daily basis like we used to. We want to really help those communities get to a place of stability, because that helps animals and people overall. So our real goal here is that we want to end overpopulation and homelessness, not just in Massachusetts, which we have achieved, but throughout the country. And then maybe we can just keep going to around the world. And ultimately, the part that we all want to get to is the reduction of euthanasia for just simply time and space alone. And to be able to do that, we have to really look at what is the root cause of that overpopulation in each community. It can be different. We know it has a similar starting point, but each need is, can vary from state to state. And as I mentioned, we really focused on South Carolina. We had started a really great relationship with Charleston Animal Society for the Relocation Program. And what I loved about that is that Charleston is working to bring in, to help the shelters around them that are dealing with capacity issues. And that they were also willing to join us to go deeper than that So Berkeley Animal Center and Darlington Humane Society are the shelters that we're mentoring right now in South Carolina, and we provide professional mentorship for that leadership group. We do see that in high stress environments like these shelters, there's a lot of turnover and there's not a lot of time for training. And there's not always a mentor available to them to be able to ask questions of. So Michelle joins me on some of those calls with Berkeley, and we take every meeting that we take the last 20 minutes just to talk about what do you need right now? What are you struggling with? What can we help you with? Just from a mentorship standpoint. And then also sometimes there's staffing resources to allow for professional development. There's so many animals in care that being able to send staff to a conference or to be able to do a training session in-house is a challenge in and of itself. So sometimes in order for us to, for them to be able to get what they need to be more and more successful, we have to just support them from replacing them and giving them that opportunity for professional development. And then we go deeper. One of the things that we recently did is we joined Charleston Animal Society on the largest vaccination clinic in South Carolina history. And it also set a Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of animals vaccinated. So there's over 2,000 animals that were helped on that one day. And we brought our teams down to really help with that, to make sure that even just the basic level of care was being provided in a community that veterinary resources are so scarce that it's really hard for people just to get the very basics. And we also wanted to go deeper. And a really good example of that is the Trap, Neuter, Vaccinate, and Return program. And I think the part that I really liked about that is when we met with Berkeley and we connected with them on a mentorship level, the first goal that we had was how do we help them with their cat euthanasia issue, their cat capacity issue. They had a live release rate of under 50% for several years. And, how could we help them get to a point where they were having more success with cats? Of course, we worked with relocation first. That's a good starting point. But what we recognized is that the cats that were coming into their shelters were cats that weren't going to be able to be placed, nor were they going to be cats that could be relocated. And what I mean by that is they had an ordinance in their county that said if anybody calls for a complaint about cats in their yard that are causing a problem, then the animal control officer is required to trap that animal and remove that animal, bring it to the shelter. Well, if that's a feral cat that's not social with humans, it's unsafe to keep in the shelter, and it's also not possible to rehome or relocate. So that was leading to euthanasia. So we worked with them to change the legislation to allow for a 2-year pilot program for TNVR to replace that removal process. And we believe that that would be much more successful in dealing with the free roaming cat issues in their community. That was great, except there was no veterinary resources. They could not get a veterinarian or technicians to be able to help with that program. So we recognize this is the time we need to share some of those resources and help make sure that this pilot program became permanent legislation and then hand it over to the community over time. So I'm proud to say that we started that program in April. We send 2 veterinarians and 4 technicians down each month. They do about 130 spays and neuters to 150 spay and neuters each weekend. And since we started this last April, not only have we spayed and neutered over 1,300 cats, but the live release rate at Berkeley has gone from under 50% to about 82%, and it's continuing to grow. And most importantly is they're not getting flooded every single summer with huge numbers of unwanted kittens. That kitten population is changing, and it's stabilizing in a very short period of time. So it's very exciting. We're going to continue to look at ways that we can help with solving that problem on the ground, and then also using relocation to supplement in the process. Next slide, Allie. All right, and here's another really good example of sharing those resources. I recognize there's pictures of 2 cats here, but Doug is the one on the left that's stretching out. And I think this is a really good example of what these mentorships mean. Berkeley was dealing with a crisis situation in which they were responding to a hoarding situation with a failed rescue that had a long history of neglect. And they had to deal with taking all of these cats out of that facility in a short period of time. They just did not have the staffing resources. They've never dealt with a hoarding case situation. They were overwhelmed very quickly. And that's one where we were able to identify that we have a strength in the law enforcement department, a law enforcement agent, and an additional law enforcement staff member went down on a moment's notice, helped with the actual investigation, removal of the animals, and then care of those animals afterwards. And then we were able to bring a number of those cats up to Massachusetts to be able to be adopted. And Doug is one of my favorites. This rescue group that was failed was particularly, they were targeting special needs animals. So Doug had FIV. He also is missing an ear. He's a little bit beat up, but he was basically the nicest cat you could ever imagine. He welcomed everybody with a giant hug and was just such a special cat. And I think we knew that the second he got up to Massachusetts, he was going to get adopted quickly. And he was. He was adopted to a wonderful family who cherishes him. And I think it's just really nice to see that Doug had an opportunity with us because, first of all, we were able to send our team down to help with this case. And then we were also able to bring him and others up to be able to get adopted. The guy on the right is also a really good hugger. So I think they have that in common. He also got adopted. And excited that we're able to help in many different ways in that case. Next slide, Allie. All right, so challenges with relocation. I just want to, again, reiterate that sometimes this is a misrepresentation of the need or issues. I do think this is a case where there's sometimes a lot of mystery around what Southern shelters do, who they are, and what they're trying to accomplish, and that they're somehow different. Or not working as hard, or whatever those things may be. And I just really want to make sure that if everybody walks away and understands that we love the partners we work with, they're all doing amazing work, and there's lots of great opportunity to continue to change that messaging and understanding. The pandemic impact has been a challenge. We have seen that there's been fluctuations in animal population and needs for relocation that have changed dramatically. In the first couple of, in 2021, when we first affiliated with Northeast, there wasn't a lot of animals to move. It was kind of a very unique situation. In 2022, we have seen that has been a major change. As Michelle had mentioned, there is a national crisis right now with animals in shelters, and that's largely due to a slowdown in adoptions. And I think that is the core source for that issue is the economic downturn that we're all experiencing. And that's really impacting shelters around the country and animal populations. Mentioned burnout and turnover at the source. There is just, unfortunately, so much stress, and that sometimes it's not able to sustain, and having inconsistent leadership really does make that a challenge. Disease issues. Michelle mentioned that we follow the MDAR regulations, and that can be challenging because it means that we can't bring up every animal that we want to work with because they don't qualify for relocation. But also just the disease in general does sometimes slow down this process, either at the source or when they come up to us. It's one of the reasons that we also wanted to make sure that we give some resources for vaccination to try to just help, reduce disease overall in the communities that we're helping. And logistics and distance. Michelle mentioned one of the states that we take the largest number of animals from is Texas, but driving an animal from Texas is just too much for that animal to endure. So that does require flights, and that does require additional resources, financial resources, and logistics management, and that can be quite expensive. So it is something that the expense alone is something that we have to really work on to try to keep that a possibility for us to continue to help animals. And that's certainly where we need everybody's help here that's listening to this, is that we need some financial support to be able to help keep this relocation train moving. Move to the next slide, Allie. So, finally, how can you help? We need everyone to support this mission. This is obviously a passion of ours and something that we have incredibly dedicated staff and volunteers that work tirelessly to try to help animals all around the country. But like I said, it's expensive, it's taxing. We certainly need financial assistance to be able to do that. But also we really need adopters. We have to make sure that we're adopting out animals locally here as efficiently as we possibly can, so that we can continue to have this maximum amount of kennel space to be able to relocate animals up from other parts of the country. And we also need foster homes. As Michelle mentioned, with the Husky case, there's animals that come in that need time out of the shelter to be able to be available for adoption. And so we know that we need more and more fosters, and we certainly need more and more dog fosters, especially, and those that can help with some challenges, either behavior or medically, or helping animals grow that are born in foster as well. And then lastly, we need volunteers on the ground. A lot of logistics. You can see here in this picture, We pick up animals from airports. We have to receive them, get them settled in, and start that whole process. It does take a lot of time and effort, and we really need volunteers to help along the way. So you can see all of those opportunities on our website and help us in our mission. And next slide, Allie. I'm going to hand it over to the Q&A session now.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate it. I'm so proud of this work. I'm beaming, I have to tell you. And for the folks in the audience, I have to also brag a little. I don't think that there is any organization in this country that is doing as much to help homeless animals as is the MSPCA-Angell. We are so proud of this work. And I'm also proud to introduce you to Dana Lawson. Dana is a manager in our development team. And Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we have some questions, and Mike and Michelle have agreed to stay on to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Michelle. We have our first question is from Facebook. It says, you've had success with spay and neuter programs in Massachusetts. How do you work with the South Carolina shelters to get those programs going there? I understand there may be some, in South Carolina, there may be some reluctance to spay and neuter, or is that a feeling, or is it unnecessary? Or sorry, is that just a feeling that is just unnecessary? So, how do you get those programs started there?
I can take this one if you want, Michelle. I think, the first and most important part is the last part of that question about, do people not want to spay and neuter? And I think I hear that a lot. And I think it's really one of those myths where it's not really so much that people don't want to spay and neuter. It's just that people can't afford it. They can't get it. It's such a hard situation when you look at especially rural communities where the physical space between where they live and where a vet clinic might be out of their reach. Maybe don't have a car to drive 50 miles to the nearest vet hospital. We all know that the veterinary world is overwhelmed right now, and has been since the pandemic. So it's hard to find even appointments for both people and the shelters. It's an equal issue. And then lastly, I think, one thing that people don't necessarily realize is that there is deeper pockets of poverty in some of the states that we're helping, and that the financial resources it takes for those folks to be able to acquire spay neuter, it's not a matter of want, it's just the ability to actually spay and neuter those animals. And what we see is that, what is easily tagged as irresponsible people, I'm not seeing that. When we see and meet people in those communities, we see people who care about animals just like we do. They're doing the very best that they can. They just don't have the access to resources that I think everybody would like to see. And it's and from our standpoint, we have a lot of work at our home base that we need to do from a veterinary perspective. We're not immune to the veterinary technicians shortage. That's an area that we need help with. So if there's any technicians on the call, please join our team. We could use you. So we're doing our best part to work with other organizations like Charleston Animal Society to find any shareable resources that we can to start fill those gaps, while we also help support those communities to be able to build their own veterinary programs as well.
Just tacking onto that, Mike. So the ultimate goal would be to have kind of these spay and neuter programs, these kind of travel clinics kind of everywhere that could pop up everywhere for everyone in their communities to help spread the access to spay and neuter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're doing, like I said, that TNVR clinic, we're presenting at New England Fed. We're going to ask, that's coming up next month. It's a local conference. And what we're going to ask is that other New England shelters join us in this mission. And if they can share a technician or veterinarian or support staff, that they join, and that we spread that mission out and all try to take that responsibility to end overpopulation together.
So the next question is a specific question, but you may know the answer. There was a cat with a foot problem in emails recently. Did this cat get transferred, and how was the outcome of removing the bad foot?
Assume that's Ice Cream. Michelle, you could probably take this one.
Yeah. Ice Cream had a bad leg that we amputated, and he did quite well with that procedure. He was staying in our volunteer coordinator's office to recover for a couple of days, won a lot of hearts. He did get adopted yesterday, actually. He went home. It's a really exciting day. Yeah.
Awesome.
This is a kind of a general question. This is a specific question, but also kind of ties in with another question. So this person here said they had driven their own adopted dog back from Oklahoma. So they adopted a dog in Oklahoma and drove it back home. They say, what is the story with the quarantine in Massachusetts? Was I breaking the law in doing that?
So yeah, that's a good question. There are a whole bunch of rules and regulations when it comes to interstate transfer of animals, but you know, an individual adopter going down and adopting from another state is not, they're not subject to the isolation period that we have. We have to go through a 48-hour isolation and a veterinary check process to be able to clear those animals for adoption. And that's really shelter specific, so shelter to shelter transfer. If a person is adopting an animal from another state, they do have some additional requirements, like making sure that animal has a health certificate and is rabies vaccinated. But it's honestly one of those things where I don't know that there's too much oversight on that overall in general. So you didn't break the law, so that's the most important part.
Yeah, you did a good thing. This is a person asking, they live in Florida every winter, lucky them. They say it's heartbreaking to see the number of kittens and shelters around, and it feels that there's an overburden of animals in that state. How do we decide what communities we help, and are we coming to Florida?
Well, we are coming to Florida, and I think how do we help is we have reprogrammed our system to be able to be as nimble as possible. So we go where the need is. We don't restrict ourselves to individual states, but we do like to focus on certain ones that we know we can build really strong partnerships with. Florida is one that we do have good partnerships with. We worked with Jacksonville Humane Society. We work with Vero Beach. And what I think is interesting and unique about Florida is that there are very clear well-resourced shelters that are able to help animals in different ways. And then there's other shelters that are not well-resourced. And a lot of those are municipal animal control facilities. So what we've been working on in Florida, because it is kind of a strange state from the animal welfare perspective, no offense to Floridians here, but we do see that there are times in which some of those shelters are actually importing animals from Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, and other states, while other shelters are desperate to move animals out. And so it is a little bit of a confusing place, but what we found in the way that we help is that we work with those well-resourced shelters, Vero Beach, Jacksonville, and with an intentionality to use our combined resources to help those under-resourced shelters. So we found that, so for example, Polk County Animal Services is a very underfunded municipal shelter where a lot of cat need is, but we can't work with them directly to be able to bring those animals from their shelter to our shelter and meet the MDAR regulations. They just don't have the resources to be able to meet those requirements and spend the amount of time for the logistics to be able to get those animals there. So we use Jacksonville as the intermediary. They pull in animals from Polk County. They provide them resources. If those animals are ready to go during our transport, they get on the transport. If they're not, we take animals from Jacksonville that are available for adoption, and they continue to work with those Polk County animals and get them adopted locally. So by working together, we are actually getting to the solution to the areas that are underfunded.
Very cool.
Hope that made sense. It's a little bit complex.
The next question is a two-part question, two kind of separate questions. So I'll start with the first one because it ties in with what we were just saying. But the MSPCA sounds like we're doing a lot of work on the national level in this area. Are other SPCAs nationally surprised that the MSPCA is doing so much work, or are there other high-ranking ones that we work with?
Well, I think I don't know if they're surprised that the work we do, we have a really good reputation in animal welfare for such a long period of time that I think we are known as a solutions-based organization. But I think where we have joined the relocation component, I can tell you that that has been an important part. Our affiliation with Northeast has meant that we are now on the map for a go-to organization to call when there is a crisis like a natural disaster or cruelty case. They know that we have the bandwidth now, especially, as our expanded shelter system, to be able to help in many different ways. And we are one of the leading organizations in the country for relocation. There are other wonderful groups that are doing this in Colorado and Oregon and other parts. And we kind of split up the state. Our focus is really on that Southeast component. Others are focusing on, the Southwest area. And I think everyone is coming together to try to help Texas because that's a huge need that kind of requires everyone's attention.
Let's see, they've got a bunch of questions. So some of these we might not be able to answer live. But let's see, hold on one second. This is a question I'm not sure you might be able to answer, Mike, but you may have seen this on the road. Do you see that there are recent Southern vet school graduates moving to other areas, or there are just less vets in the South, or are they moving up to these kind of areas? I know that's not your expertise, but maybe on the road you've seen something like that.
I think it's one of those challenges that we're seeing throughout the country, in which a lot of the conglomerate veterinary hospitals are outcompeting a lot of the shelters that are able to, they're outcompeting the salaries and sign-on bonuses for shelters that may not have huge resources to be able to attract veterinarians that they need. So I think because there's a veterinarian shortage, there's a lot of competition. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the less funded shelters that really need this are struggling to compete with attracting candidates. But I do think one of the things that's important and that we know is that the interest level in helping in shelter medicine and community medicine is stronger and stronger and growing each year in the veterinary schools. So we know that there are people who are really excited to work on a mission-based approach to veterinary medicine, and we need them. So we certainly hope that that continues to grow and people continue to follow that career path.
All right, and then just the last question I think we have time for before we have to say goodbye. Any questions that weren't answered, we'll try to get back to you on email. But this one is just asking how, throughout all this, are you able to help any Massachusetts-based breed-specific rescues?
Well, I think we certainly do work with breed-specific rescues. It really depends on the need. If we see a law enforcement case that's all one purebred animal, then we certainly are, working together. Or if breed-specific rescues are overwhelmed, we may assist them. But I think for Massachusetts, what I can say more broadly is that even though we are working all around the country to help animals get relocated to Massachusetts, we're never going to ignore the need at home. We're going to always continue to focus on the animals that are nearby us that need assistance. And we do that through working with animal control agencies, other shelters, and rescues of all different types. So I think we're also well known in Massachusetts that if someone's struggling with an issue, they know that they can reach out to us directly.
Great. Thank you, guys.
So guys, Mike, Michelle, thank you so much again for a terrific presentation. It was really a privilege to have you share your insights with us.